Welcome everybody to Bitcoin Live on Saturday. Today with me in the show is Feza, a very good friend of the channel. It's good to see you again, Feza.
It's good to see you, Nicolas, as well as always. I've got a bit of a psychological roller coaster philosophy ride for us in store as always, so it should be fun.
Yeah, I've been on a emotional roller coaster these last few weeks. I'm still not home. I'm staying with a friend. But yeah, I'm always in for roller coasters. So tell me about it. What has happened? I think it has to do with art and censorship.
Yeah,
So
well, it's a sort of it's a particular project that I've been working on called Census, but I think now just it started feeling like what's actually been happening is that this has been happening for about 15 years. And it is because I kind of understand that the art world runs on its own rules, and then the NFT world became and started running on its own rules, and you have society, and that has its own kind of blind spots, and the evolution of power is a particular one that kind of goes in certain waves. And artists, of course, Joe Rogan often talks about the sacred clown, is that how you know that you're in a sort of a tyranny is that if the king doesn't have the sacred clown who is allowed to make fun of the king. And in this particular age that we live in, we've seen comedians take big hits on that, but comedians are thriving, whereas in fact artists are kind of in a similar position. They're not the sacred clown per se, but they're meant to be mirrors towards where we are as societies and what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to express. And we have this tension in between the emerged, I would say, curator class of the more prestigious art world, so to speak, as well as what is being expressed and the kind of superstardom of the curators and their lifestyles and this kind of thing, almost taking over in an Instagram style the actual people who are making the art. So in some sense, if you look at the structure of the museums themselves, sometimes you can have that the only people who won't get paid in a museum show, and this includes, of course, the cleaners who clean up the whole museum, and the museum was put up because of the artists. It might just be that the only ones who don't get paid when these shows roll are the artists. So sometimes it's a really airtight thing on how to navigate this whole world. And in particular, I would say ever since Warhol, it has been gay people and feminists and many others in a philosophy sense who overtook the ideological side of, let's say, the museum world or the curatorial world and this kind of thing. And while there's nothing wrong with that, I'm just saying it as a statement, they do come with a certain kind of outlook on the world and a certain power position of what is preferred and what is not. And in my particular case, I started making art about 15 years ago by starting to body paint on women. And often they are, gorgeous and kind of deal with the ideal, so to speak, as in that we now run our society by this idea that the more victimhood points you have, is especially in the art world, the more you are in the sort of totem pole of the hierarchy, the more you are. Let's say if you're a black trans woman who is, this and that, then you're kind of very high up in that. And let's say if you're just a gay straight white male, then you're not very high in that hierarchy. But there's a certain kind of preference that the art world has seen, that many of the more, let's say, feminist minded would think that the female nude has been utilized and exploited for centuries, so to speak, and the women have been objectified and this kind of thing. And what it really needs to be about is empowerment, and it needs to be about all these different kinds of shapes or forms and inclusivity and all of this kind of stuff. And to many degrees, I agree that we should have as wide of a variety of things that you can express as possible. But I would say that there's become somewhat of a tyranny of the minority also in a way that there's only a specific kind of field that inside of the brackets of which you can express, or you are then kind of considered to be out. And I'm personally in a particular corner, because I was brought up by my mom and my grandma and my great grandma, very kind of powerful women, and their point of view, as well as the males from my family, and a specific other kind of point of view. And I've come to, ever since a kid, of course, like most boys do, you respect your mom and you want to get along with women in general, and the whole thing. But you start to, as a man, you start to understand that there's a certain dominance of a certain mentality that you also need to break through. And sometimes, let's say in Finland, that was something that is generally considered to be something that the man goes into the military, and that's the something that takes you out. And in African tribes, it's something that the young boy is taking in the middle of the night out of the hut and put through this kind of ritual through which the boy is separated from the matriarchy, so to speak, and then becomes a man in his own right. And so, and these kind of, we don't really have a ritual like that, especially in the West. We haven't had it for a long, long time. And we also have now decades of women being in very powerful positions, actually, in society, from presidents to museum directors to all these kinds of different things. Yet we still kind of pretend in 2024 like women have no power or no equality, and there's a big thing that we still need to overcome, and these kinds of things. And I think it has actually become a certain amount of, let's say, a women's movement in such a way that you're not allowed to critique it at all, and because otherwise you're some sort of horrible slur. But even those who are in great positions of power, they still somehow are not in power, and therefore kind of not accountable for any of the actions that they do, or kind of what they exclude or include, or this kind of thing. And I'm of course in a very horrible kind of form, because I'm a straight white male in my middle age. And the thought crimes that I have committed, of course, have to do with that in my art, I try to talk about the spiritual realm often, and sometimes that has to do with the ideal. And in these body painting, and as well as some of these images that you now showed, which are these nudes that I've been shooting and then lacing them with paint. But importantly, psychologically, what this project has always been about is human empowerment, but especially women's empowerment through the actual most of my models being female, and exploring their psychological things of what is holding you back from going to the next level, or what kind of dreams would you like to be exploring, and how that relates to the bigger story of humanity. And I suppose it's in that way a very traditional artist muse, this kind of a relationship, but it's very involved in the actual stories of the models, and me as a storyteller trying to bring it all together, as me providing the masculine side of the energy and then the feminine side in this way. And what I suppose saying somewhat is that, because the ideal is something that we really don't like in our age at the moment. We're trying to say that the ideal is brutal, no one can really reach it, maybe we shouldn't celebrate achievement or beauty or these kinds of things, and maybe we would be more healthy this way. And Jordan Peterson, like you said, is one of those who's been saying that, of course, we can't achieve the ideal, and the ideal is absolutely brutal. And in this particular way, let's say the dating apps have revealed that 80% of men are unattractive to the females who are on those dating apps. They find them unappealing. So that means that there's now a simping class of males of like 80% of people who are not in the game. They're not in the radar of women at all. And then there's a very high top percentage of men that those women who they actually pay attention to then think are slimy and assholes, because they just keep playing them around. And this kind of a merry-go-round, which is somewhat of an unhealthy foundation for a society. And this is to do with how the monetary system works, how our social lives are being shaped by the different apps that we now use, from Tinder to whatever, those kinds of things. And of course, the sort of conservative, in a spiritual sense, structures, what we've had from churches to any kind of spiritual practice. I mean, it's one thing to have a spiritual perspective and kind of talk a spiritual game, and then it's another that you actually do something that is a practice that folds and molds your life on the day-to-day basis. And we don't, in general, have much of a functional foundation like that anymore, and it shows in multiple different kinds of ways. And this is the soup that I'm kind of in, that I'm doing what is quote unquote the right thing, which is women's empowerment, and the actual process of it, and the model testimonies that I now have 16 of from this now census project, which are all like going, oh, I can't believe what just happened, and I feel so liberated and empowered and all of this kind of thing. So the actual function of what is being said is happening and has been happening for 15 years. But because and I kind of hesitate to say this because it sounds really lame. It still sounds so lame to say that, oh, it has something to do with the fact that I'm white and a man. It's like, I really, really detest saying that on any kind of level, but it is a reality. Because if I was a female and I was doing what I was doing with all the different merits and the projects that I'd been doing, I probably would be one of the biggest artists in the world. And it's just because of I don't fit the mold of who is saying this, the thing that is wanting to be said, which is the requirement. And there's a juxtaposition and a communication line that is broken in between these two things. And it's starting to drive me pretty nuts. Because the kind of smirks and silence is the biggest tool that is being used in this whole thing. It's not like you were rejected. It's not like you were just not included. And that's the sleight of hand that keeps happening on different kinds of levels all the time. And of course, that has a psychological effect on me, it has a financial effect on me, and it has very much a social kind of all in general, how my work is seen or not seen. And now, as an added element, sorry to go on at such
go on.
beginning,
yeah.
But
you're setting the stage. That's good.
Yeah, so then social media all of a sudden, and this is what started feeling like such a betrayal, because you know that I'm such a huge fan of Elon Musk, and I really agree with the freedom of speech concept that we often talk about, because it's the same as freedom of art. If you don't have freedom of speech, you definitely don't have freedom of art. And this inclusivity talk, which has kind of flipped around to be quite a sensorial movement in this kind of way, I was very happy that the X platform started going into a very different direction. And then now all of a sudden I started realizing that my artworks that I'm sharing, which don't have any body parts like nipples or vaginas or anything like that, it's nude and beautiful, sensual, certainly sometimes can be seen as erotic or something like that, but it's not breaking anything that the internet is not absolutely full of, or advertising or movies or whatever. So it's sort of in between these lines, but anyone with eyes will see that this is not, you know, something that belongs into the Pornhub, you know, websites or something like that. So it's kind of obvious, but still they started being slapped with all different kinds of sanctions. And I know that my social media accounts have had these shadow bans forever, because it doesn't make any sense to make huge projects that sometimes reach millions and millions of people, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people, like in the case of Vina, and then my social media accounts don't grow by an inch.
Yeah.
You know, so there's a kind of broken thing there, and now that we start to see more how these platforms algorithmically work, that if you've been slapped a different kind of like, oh, okay, this may contain some harmful language or nudity or something, you just get put into an algorithmic bracket, and then most of the things that I share, even though I have some followers, are seen by like 40 people or to 80 to 100 people or something like that. And it doesn't make, even though you retweet them all the time and kind of try to help.
Because they're beautiful.
Yeah. So, but this, so I started to feel this kind of a really, really big bind on this thing. And it feels like such an injustice, because I'm doing the right thing, quote unquote, but then I'm just not the person who should be doing it, because that breaks a bigger narrative. And then you have all of these tools to reach all of these people on social media, and I can't really do that because, funnily enough, we tried to pay to get my art in front of people on X or these different platforms, and they got banned immediately and said that no, you can't, this is like inappropriate material. So the one advert that we actually managed to put through is an artwork that shows nothing bad, but I slapped a huge parental advisory kind of like shitty thing on top of it, and that felt so icky because it's like those who then go clicking on that link wishing for porn are disappointed because there's nothing there that you can really see, and then all of those who would be looking for art are now going to click it because they think that it's porn. And I'm going like, oh, motherfucker, this is getting to be quite difficult. And then when it comes to the real world, the curators and the galleries and the museums and those kinds of things, even though there would be critical acclaim by professors and all different kinds of media people and whatever who've said positive things about it, or the substance is there and justified intellectually, as well as, you might say that my artwork is many things, or you might not like it, but it's of a professional grade in terms of how it's presented. So it's not going further in the physical world as I would like it to go, and it's certainly not kind of being taking flames in the social media world, because it's not allowed to be actually seen by people, and it's more than anything, I'm just losing followers all the time. So I put on a brave face always, because I don't like the victim narrative kind of thing. I don't like that kind of thing. But then sometimes it started feeling like, holy shit, man, this is really starting to affect me on a psychological level. I'm losing sleep. I'm waking up in the middle of the night thinking about how can I get out of this jail that I've been put into, and it feels, especially like I said, on the X platform, it's so sucky because you can see hardcore porn. I mean, I didn't have to dig 2 layers, and there was trans pegging, in front of me, and then there's murders, like, someone stabbed 11 times or shot or beaten with a bat, or whatever the fuck these feeds are these days, which is like the political craziness and kind of like violence is taking over these things. And then I'm trying to do a beautiful empowerment artwork that is not even breaking the rules, and that gets slapped with an actually you can't show this. So the paradox of this all just started like warping my mind to the point that I was like, hey, Nicholas, can we have a chat? I'd like to, have a podcast thing, even just to kind of think this through. What is this thing that is happening on a, just a personal and this level, but also just on a philosophy level in the grand scheme of society? Everything is upside down, man. It's so fucking nuts.
Oh, well, thank you for setting the stage, and it's always good to talk about these things, even if it's just, to relieve yourself from this burden, just to share it with somebody and to share it with our audience. So that's a good thing. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you hear to unpack. And one of the other things that I really liked that you mentioned on your thread on Twitter or X was the connection to a social score or a credit score, right? What you have in China. Because basically what you're saying is you're being shadow banned. Well, we know all about that. we actually lost a YouTube channel, and I was watching TX. What's it? TX Capital, I think. TX West Capital. And it turns out that their YouTube channel was also banned, so they also had to restart. So banning is like, something we all know, but shadow banning is something that people are not really aware of. And so it ties into CBDCs, it ties into China, it ties into sort of the new structure that's being built around us. And I think one of the reasons that you might be being banned is not just your art, but also your views, right? And the way you think and you talk. And that's my personal opinion. I don't know if it's true, of course, but it's a danger in the society that we live in, that certain people who are too critical are being shadow banned, and they know they are being shadow banned because their reach is just insanely tiny compared to others who are doing similar things. And those people who are not being banned, they don't notice because they're not being banned, and they might actually be promoted, like like you say, the porn stars, or the people with fan clubs and that kind of stuff. They are actually being pushed forward, and that makes it even harder to see. It makes it even harder for people to see what's not there, right? Because they're not aware that it's there in the first place. So they don't even know what they're missing because it's invisible to them. And in my opinion, I think they're sort of fine tuning the system of tomorrow, right? And we are the guinea pigs. And there, but soon it will be applied to everybody everywhere.
Well, because just by, I mean, I'm very aware that the couple of things that I just said there, like, for example, that the art world has been run, I mean, probably old straight white males are still the ones who buy the most art in the upper echelons. But let's say if the curators are the neck that make the head look where what is being bought and what is acceptable and who sets the trends of the art world, it has been gays and women for a long time now. And just to say that out loud is that, because it's true and it has been true for a long time, how come is it that no artist says that?
Yeah.
So I'm very aware that just by saying that, I've now further excluded myself from God knows how many different things, because that's
your credit score just dropped, Faisal.
Yeah, because it's the Fight Club rules, right? It's like, we don't talk about the Fight Club. We don't talk about the Fight Club. We don't talk about that kind of things inside of the art world. That is absolutely verboten. And this is the kind of thing, is that this is, to bring it back full circle, is the sacred clown type thing. Is that if the artists can't talk about their own world, about very obvious things and kind of power structures and agendas and these kinds of things that we know who are on the inside of it, it's so obvious. If you're not allowed to even point to it, even in a funny way, then that means that there's something sort of rotten in the state of Denmark, so to speak. And that's been the case for a long time, but it ties to so many different kinds of things and how it reverberates throughout our whole society. And as someone, because I've dedicated so much of my time and actual attention to women's empowerment and these kinds of beautiful presentations and ideal presentations, and really dedicated to it, I'm, maybe because of that, probably naively and erroneously thinking that I can say some things out loud that would be criticizing this thing a little bit, in the hopes of it evolving, in the hopes of it becoming better, because I certainly don't want women to be disempowered or not be presidents or in high power positions or whatever it is. I would just like it to be that we all kind of play fair, and we have a certain amount of qualifications every time we are in one position to uphold whatever it is that we're upholding. So when it comes to these DEI movements and all kinds of policies that all of a sudden, like, you're making bureaucratic decisions on things that have real world consequences to a lot of different people by looking good as opposed to doing good. And that was another inspirational thing that I really liked about what Elon Musk said on stage in that one interview, is that we're hell-bent in a world where now people are looking good and saying good while doing evil. And I don't care about that. I actually want to do good, and I have the metrics on how I'm doing good, and I don't give a fuck of how that looks. And I think that's the thing that we have the wrong way around. And it transcends all, because then if you're kind of low-grade male, then you'll go the route of saying something like, oh, it's the fault of women. And if you're a low-grade female, you'll say it's the fault of men, because you'll find demonic people on both sides, or whatever spectrum you want to see it as, that people can be monsters. And then some will do a terrible amount of work on themselves and raise the vibration and their perspectives to evolve. And this is the kind of thing.
Well, actually, I've been talking to quite a lot of people about similar topics, and it's sort of all connected, of course. But like to your point, I think what is happening is actually it's polarizing society further, right? So their case would be that it's depolarizing, or making people come together, making society more inclusive. what it's actually doing, it's tearing society apart by incentivizing people to say certain things even if they don't mean it. They get rewarded for virtue signaling. But also, like you say, if you are not able to participate in the virtual signaling because of what you are, like like an older white privileged male or whatever, then it has you cannot even participate in that scene unless you sort of admonish yourself constantly for everything you do, and then you start with the preamble about how bad you are and your grandparents and whatever you did. So you sort of create, for example, when it comes to racism, you actually create racist, and when it comes to feminism, you actually create misogyny. So it creates these people that were actually disappearing. Like 20 years ago, we were on the right track, right? By society was actually organically becoming more inclusive, less racist, more feminist. But it was sort of from the bottom up instead from the top down. But if you press it from the top down, like they're doing now for the past 10, 15 years, and it's only getting harsher, you're actually sort of splitting society apart because of the methods that you employ to enforce it, right? It's an enforcement issue.
Yeah, and kind of like a status issue as well, because it was in particular, being in Dubai, I was paying attention to a lot of the Slavic women there being with these super puffy lips and the kind of like the operations that they do on these women that make them look demonic. And it's like they seem to all see the same doctor who was screwing up their faces in a similar kind of way. And I was like, why these lips? Why do the lips have to look like that? Don't they realize that guys really don't like that doesn't look good? And then my wife just said that it's not really about that. It's a status symbol, because it costs a certain amount to do it, and it costs a certain amount to maintain it. So it's kind of like the same as the Louis Vuitton bag. And that's when, again, it's like so upside down, is that you okay, so it's a sexual arousal beauty thing that you're attracting the other mate for you and whatever, but it's not even about that. It's about something else. And it's like these kind of mental gymnastics that people do in order to reach their status. And this whole thing is that the wokest of places are the most privileged of places, and they're not that because they want to do good, but they want the actual privilege of having the downtrodden symbol as well as the most elite kind of experiences and money. So it's like, I can afford to have these luxury beliefs like defund the police, which is obviously going to hurt the poorest and those the most need of in protection, in this virtue signaling way, to say that of course the police can do better in everywhere in the world or whatever, but to say to defund the police means that those who are the most vulnerable are immediately affected in a super harmful way by these kinds of statements, if they do become policy. And those who are saying it are probably living in gated communities and kind of fly off to an island if things get a little bit heated, because they have their own private jet type situation. So you're dealing with so much incoherence in what is being said and what it's actually about. And this is why when you start to say something like, hey, okay, so I'm all about equal pay, but if you look at how the income gap is actually generated, is that, if you look at how many dangerous jobs do you go into, jobs that scale in pay, are you willing to move, are you do all of these different kinds of things, and you approximate it across the genders, then that means that the actual difference in pay is not $1 to 70 cents. It's something like 1 cent difference. So it's not oppression, it's choice that makes the gender pay gap. But even those who know this, because it doesn't fit their narrative or whatever kind of thing that they're pushing, then they still keep lying about it even after they've realized it. So again, it's these things that we're just so derailed in our honesty.
But
towards what the actual pursuit is.
Yeah, basically society is becoming more and more politicized. Basically, everything is becoming politicized, and I think Goodhart. There's this Goodhart's law, and Goodhart's law is when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And so I think that is basically also what's happening here by setting this ideal, because basically it's also an ideal, right? That we cannot be racist, we have to be extreme feminists, we have to be extremely inclusive, which like you, I'm all for women on high places, and for gays, and for people can express their sexuality however they want to express it. But by sort of enforcing it on people, you're making it a target, right? And by making it a target, people start gaming the system in order to get the most out of the system, right? So you're basically perverting the goal that you're trying to achieve, and that's Goodhart's law. Now, when you take a target measure, it ceases to be a good measure of the operation. And you got it in many different forms. You got it also in anthropology and in sociology. But yeah, my opinion is we were on the right track, like in the 90s and in the early 2000s. Society was becoming more open, and maybe even in the 80s, right? We were on the right track towards a more inclusive society, a more open society, open-minded society about many different
We were
things.
much less racist.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, and there were many pockets where it was still around, and where the police was still brutal and going after minorities. I'm not denying any of that, but we were on the right track, and it was becoming less. And I think if we stayed on that track, because you see it with each generation, right? When a new generation comes, that generation was becoming more and more open-minded and more inclusive. And I think one of the first ways that you saw sort of this new movement where it was from on top was, for example, with the cigarette ban or the smoking ban, which was what was it in the early 2000s, when suddenly it was not allowed to smoke anywhere because it was bad for your health. And it was like almost a totalitarian movement that completely stamped out smoking. And I'm not pro-smoking. I never smoked, and I think it's bad for your health. And I also understand that there's big clubs behind it that were selling cigarettes, and you can ask yourself, if they didn't do it, many people would still be smoking. But was that the right way to do it, right? Because a lot of clubs and cafes and restaurants, they didn't make that transition to the non-smoking world. They were sort of destroyed by that tactic. And but more importantly, I think that was sort of a test, because that is there, and there I'm using there like it comes from above, somebody from above. And a lot of people are
But also,
cheerleading it.
I think it's both, honestly. But I'll tell you one of the inconsistencies that still irks me beyond, because you said all the different kinds of sexualities that people are now cool with to express. Let's say you have like in Helsinki, you'll have a month-long Pride parade, and in this parade you'll have people who are in skimpy leather straps and dressed as dogs and barking on all fours and whatever, kind of from the whatever extreme to just gay, whatever, and in between. And that's all cool. And there's kids watching these parades. And then in more extreme cases, like in America or Canada or whatever, you have trans people twerking at kids in libraries. And no one's yet kind of explained the logic of why the fuck that is necessary to me. And when you look at those, the kids who are in kind of looking at this all, if you think that they're having a great time, for the most time, at least those videos that I saw online, I felt like rescuing those kids, out of those places. But so you can be whatever gender, you can give luckily that's also something that is now being pulled back more and more. In Finland, it was forbidden, like for minors, the transitions of gender and all these different kinds of things. And people are starting to realize that they went totally overboard with it, and now they're starting to pull back on that stuff. But let's say that's all still what is allowed to be expressed now, all different kinds of sexuality, whatever you identify as, and all this kind of thing. So basically, the argument towards my work could be that, so here's a guy who is attracted to women, and he's doing these artworks, and there's somehow a sneaky version of porn where he's expressing his sexuality or something, that there's no actual empowerment thing, or there's no beauty. It's not really art. It's something that belongs in, I don't know where it belongs, because this kind of thing. But let's take the low root of looking at my work, and it's all about just sex. Okay, so everything else would be totally allowed and fine and printed and shown to kids at school, but my work, that cannot be even shown in galleries, or it can't be anywhere, because it expresses a straight guy's attraction towards women, right?
Yeah.
So the double standards and the kind of craziness that this is just so, like, this is not a thinking man's world. Like, if you start to like try to find some coherence inside of this chaos, you will lose your fucking mind.
Yeah, no, definitely. I completely agree with what you say, but I think that has, that is where ideology comes in, right? So as soon as things become ideological, they stop making sense. And I think Jordan Peterson also has done some amazing sort of speeches on the role of ideology, but it's sort of people become blinded by the ideas that they hold on, and they are not able to listen to other people once they sort of when they sort of take hold of people's minds. And
we're basically living in a giant cult.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, I think that's not true.
I can't, whatever the because John Anthony West said this at the time when I went to his house. This John, the Egyptologist, rogue Egyptologist as they call him, because he was talking to me about the Church of Progress at that time in 2012 when I was interviewing him, and we became friends, and he's like. And it became apparent of what he was saying to me, because we've talked about the Superworld collab that I did many times. The Luxor temple is that we had this magnificent temple, and we haven't built anything like that since. That from that perspective, we've been regressing at least 3,000 years. So he was talking about the Church of Progress, that there's these people who aren't very aware of history, and they certainly don't know the spiritual traditions very well, and there's many things that they don't really have any clue about, but they just keep pushing towards a progress without realizing that there's a lot of regress happening inside of that progress. And he called it the Church of Progress, and it made me laugh, because I thought that that's ridiculous. Of course we're going forward at full speed all the time, and we're the most advanced we've ever been, and amazing, and we can make mobile phones and bubblegum. Fuck you. So and then it's only a little bit later when I started pulling back a little bit and understanding how much has been lost in translation from distant past to, but even recent past, that I've actually lived. Like what you were saying about how in the 90s and early 2000 we felt like we had actually really achieved those things, equality, and no one was in their right mind was saying something racist and these kinds of things inside of a certain hegemony, I would say. And then all of a sudden those things started becoming the main issue. Yep. And we just started talking about nothing but that all the time, and that's just made it now.
Well, and then this may sound also a little bit crazy or outrageous, but with the arrival of all these populist, and they often say extreme right political groups, they actually started to emerge once they started to push this from above, right? And And I totally agree, right? This sort of phenomenon comes just as much from the bottom as from above, right? I'm not saying, that there's, some kind of cabal pushing it on people.
No,
I
well,
think,
but Jordan is right. At first, it came from the universities, and then it got usurped from
yeah,
the bottom, and
yeah,
now
but
it's
but the point is, I think, like when you sort of listen to Thomas Sowell and you have this his amazing book, his magnificent book, A Conflict of Visions, where he compares sort of two ways of looking at the world, which is sort of a more conservative kind of way and a more leftist academic kind of way. And like you say, it came through the universities, right? And they have obviously a very academic kind of view of the world, and they are naturally inclined to have structures, hierarchies, and also sort of to push it on people in order to sort of make them understand what's going on, right?
and
And if you,
allowed to live inside of a world that doesn't. You don't need to have your feet touch the ground once.
yeah, they live in ivory towers, right? So basically what they, people like that could be thinking. I'm not saying they're all thinking that, or I'm trying not to generalize here,
Yeah,
but
well, I hang around enough, academics and artists and whatever to say that there's a general theme of not being too based on on a lot of things, and sometimes when you really meet people who are like in their late 40s or 50s, 60s even, and you realize how detached from the world
yeah,
they are on
from
so many levels, you
the
can't
regular
believe the
people.
things that they actually say. Sometimes it's just like
Yeah,
this is insane.
and you also have this great book from Charles Murray, Coming Apart. And in that book, which I also recommend people to read, is he sort of makes the case that the elite are becoming more and more isolated, right? Which is twofold, right? For the first reason, it is because they're making more and more money, because the entire economy is sucking up all the wealth to the top, right? So obviously they become so rich that they become sort of detached from reality because they don't need reality anymore. And the other thing is they search each other, and they find each other, and usually that's through the university and academics where they went to school, and then they sort of lock into each other, the partners. Plus, they still hold on to, in some ways, to the old-fashioned ideas of a family, a family unit, and that kind of stuff, while society is breaking apart below them. And then, there's many movies nowadays of what's that movie that people can kill each other one day a year. There's this sort of, there's a lot of movies out there like that you see the alienation between the elite and the people below. Like they can totally no longer understand each other, and I think that's part of what we're seeing here. And sorry, what was your question? I sort
Oh
of
no,
got
but
sidetracked.
what I'm not sure if I had a question, but but I do have a continuation on what you were saying. Is that
Yeah.
do you know this American Indian activist called John Trudell?
Yeah, I think I do. Yeah.
He has, I think it's on YouTube. The documentary about his pretty brutal life, Trudell, and whatever. But he's such a eloquent speaker and powerful guy. And of course, and what he said, there was a couple of quotes. And one of the things that I got always sometimes when I'm having a bad time of it with society, that rings true is that take care of your spirit, because you're in a place where spirits get eaten.
Yeah.
That's one thing that is kind of like the part of one thing. But he basically said that, because he was very much about the New World Order and this kind of thing, and he felt it marching towards and whatever. And his whole thing was that, you guys, you think that it's just the American Indian, but soon you're all the
Yeah.
American Indian in front of this
Yeah.
machine that is coming towards us.
Yeah.
And if I was to put on my tinfoil hat of where this super anti-white kind of like now justified violence kind of insular perspective and not taking any history into context, where it's coming from is that in front of this machine that has been built to kind of go towards subjugation for the most part, is that everyone needed to be brought down.
Yes.
Where I grew up with the idea that we were all going to elevate.
Yeah.
whereas now it's become this venge circle of like anyone who still had a sense of self-worth or a positive future kind of vision or these kinds of things, and not to be in a game of musical chairs of the BPM of a fucking fast rave party, kind of ideology, is that everyone needed to be brought down, no matter what your background is, what color you are, what kind of religion you are, whatever you are. You're all just the same mud in front of the new machine that has the overlords.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I lost my train of thought of train there. But that's, I think, one of the reasons why it's sort of pushed from on top, right? So one of the reasons why it's probably pushed from on top is because the alienation between the highest and the lowest is become so extreme, which is like the wealth gap that's continually growing and expanding and accelerating. And on top of that, sort of these people finding each other and sticking together and becoming very fearful in their sort of isolationist bubble. So they think they have to sort of educate the rest of us because we're Neanderthals and cavemen and women. And I think one of the...
Do you know how funny it is when an American, someone who thinks everything America-centric and doesn't even know their own history, comes to say something like, "Oh, white people were slaves? That's ridiculous." Where do you think the word slave comes from? Slavic, who were white people taken into the Russian territories and Mongols and whatever, and all those. It's like, it's so stupid, like or ignorant of something, and so justified in its fury simultaneously, kind of in this indignation, whilst not really knowing much, that it makes it feel like there was a lot of different strings that were being pulled, that this kind of motion was being able to put kind of forward in this kind of way. But then it's also probably just people really are pissed off because the game of the musical chairs in the economy and how it works has been working against this situation being crazier and crazier for so long now.
The machine is, tearing society apart, like you say. So that of course also makes the people on the lower ladders become more, unruly, right? Because and then you need a scapegoat, and then they start scapegoating each other, and maybe the people on the top also see that it has to reset at some point. So better to scapegoat people and not put the focus on yourself, but sort of split society apart. I mean, there's a lot of possible theories here, and I would say that they're probably all going on at the same time. But I think, like what you said at the beginning, it's like people are living in a bubble, right? And those bubbles are only growing bigger. You got the asset bubbles, of course, but you also got these bubbles that are created by artificial intelligence online, search engines, but also these ideological bubbles that are, have been growing for a very long time, like postmodernism, post-structuralism, feminism, intersectionalism, right? How many isms do you have? All these sort of things that have been going on in universities, and the idea that you always have to study in order to become something, right? That every child has to go to university to get a grade or whatever. Those kind of things, made us where we are today. And I think also, when you sort of think about the people that are easiest to influence are actually the people who are sort of smart but not super smart. And those you want to sort of indoctrinate. Like if you were like a Mao Zedong or whoever, that's sort of the target group, because the people who are difficult to educate because they have like a low intelligence, you lost them anyway, right? So they're sort of doing their own thing anyway. You have no influence on that group, only through economic means. But the group that you sort of want to capture is the group from that is sort of intelligent but not highly intelligent, and you basically want to indoctrinate that group and turn them into your shock troops. And then the tiny elite of very intelligent people, that you cannot really influence them, of course. Only you can bribe them, right? You can sort of bring them on board. And if you don't do that, they become your opponents, of course, in such a system. Just thinking about it from a game theory perspective, I think sort of what has happened on a university and the idea that everybody has to go to university is that group that you want to brainwash has been successfully brainwashed by by the society that we created. And either it has happened naturally or organically. I'm not saying that couldn't happen.
Well, it certainly didn't feel organic. When I went to film school in the UK, it was something that the indoctrination in the year 2000 to 2003 was so clear and abundant back then already. I can only imagine what it's like now.
I just skipped the boat, when it became like really insane. I thought like, okay, this is, this is not gonna last very long, but it always lasts much longer than you think, right? The same with the economy. Like you think it will blow up any minute, and then it takes like another 10 years. but also, for example, with America, I mean, we're clearly progressing towards a point where the system is breaking apart, and people are, feeling it all around them. But and then my personal opinion is that America will have a reboot or will restart itself. But I think we're actually at that point in Roman society where Rome went from a republic to an empire. And I think if America can successfully reboot itself, it will be as an empire, like a real empire, not the stuff that people often say about it right now. I think it will be unapologetically an empire. And I think Starship Troopers is a movie that comes to my mind. But yeah, this is, I got a big tinfoil hat on my head most of the time. So, people do with it as you please. But when I sort of look at you and what is happening to you, I think your art is amazing. I think you're an incredible artist. And there's many like you who are, incredibly talented and are very nuanced and, very open-minded and inclusive. I mean, basically, these are all women that you painted, and they're all very happy about the result, right? And you interviewed them. I love the interviews that you did with them, and they all show that the whole thing that you should be, that your art is like white privileged or male oriented, or that you're turning them into
even if it was, I'm such a minority inside of the art world that in the representation that they think I'm doing somehow badly, there's hardly any of us doing it anywhere there. So the inclusivity thing goes ass backwards in this one as well. But it's just that maybe if I was able to keep my mouth shut more about injustice, this would have been or certain flavors of injustice, then this would have been, but it wasn't even that. It's just that like once you open up the Pandora's box of thinking in an age when that is not appropriate to kind of think outside of how narrow the box is. Sorry?
Thinking has been outsourced.
Yeah. So I kind of like, because this is the funny thing, like I've been in this art community of 3 artists now called Pro Art Collective here in Finland for a bit, and to have 3 artists agree on something is, even though we are very aligned with many different things, is very difficult. And then to kind of say that, what kind of art jail are we in, that there's a massive part of our industry that I'm pretty much the only one that I've ever heard who said anything like what we've been speaking about now here. And the only reason can be that intuitively or so on some level, those artists who usually quarrel about absolutely anything and make it even a point to disagree on something just to get attention are in total agreement that this is the way that it should be, and there's nothing to be critiqued about this, and everything is just fine and dandy. They can only get to that point by realizing that, if I say anything about this, my career is dead. Yeah. I won't be getting anywhere. And that's I'm sort of there.
And that's what I meant with the good hard law, right? Because it works both ways, right? So the people who know how to play the game can go up the ladder, even if they don't mean a word of what they say. and do the opposite in practice. And then you got the people who are fearful of losing everything in case they open their mouth about it. And that's the other group, of course.
Well, I'm in a position
then,
where it doesn't matter anymore whether I say it or not. I've been already put into a quote unquote jail ages ago, and it's not going to go one way or another.
Yeah.
And this was the sort of point when I've been talking, because it's these abstract ways of talking about Web3 or Bitcoin or freedom or whatever it is. And to a lot of Westerners, up until now, they've been kind of concepts that you entertain or whatever, but you don't really need them. You don't really need a decentralized social media platform, because most of the things that you're saying are in cohesion with everything that is right and appropriate, and so to speak. So I'm now looking into Farcaster and Orb and Lens and all of those different kinds of platforms, not because I want to add something and build another social presence anywhere. I hated to build the first ones. But I have to go there if I'm going to try to find any reach for my work whatsoever. And like, this was the idea, because I've said it a couple of times, I think, on your show, this whole idea of the Medici family supporting the high arts and kind of the Renaissance and all that unfolded. And I think most of the people who are now working in Web3 are doing their hardest for that revolution or Renaissance not to happen. We gave the keys to the kingdom come to people who were going to pull the rug from right underneath it.
Yeah.
And it's like, no matter how much of a Cassandra's scream you're going to do about it, it just seems to be going equally into the same direction, as opposed to, there was that brief moment in crypto art. Maybe it was there longer because I came in 2017. Maybe it was there before already, probably to a certain degree. And then it lasted until about COVID. And then the NFT thing took over, and we imported from the legacy art world all of the curators and their mentality that has been running the art world for the last 40 years. And all of a sudden, this idea of the opened up philosophy and expression and expanding to the metaverse or all the way to ancient Egypt got drowned in the process of absolute greed and fuckery, and then it's then also, if I say it like this, it's like, oh, Vesa is just bitter, this and blah, blah. Yeah, I'm a bit bitter about it. I'm a bit angry too, because it means so much that this thing would have opened up and become the thing that it has the potential to be. But now we're just doing this little merry-go-round in the kindergarten again.
And I think there's a lot of similarities with the internet itself, right? When the internet appeared, the internet also had like an interesting origin story, right? With DARPA, the DARPANet. It kind of resembles a little bit of Bitcoin, right? Because some people say it has been created by the NSA or whoever. So, but it's a kind of shadowy background, and then it emerged on the scene. And the first things that took over internet were piracy. Everybody had a little nook and cranny on the internet, doing their own thing, and everybody had sort of his or her own pirate station, broadcasting their own idiosyncratic views and interests, and you had to sort of navigate that maze. And it was about freedom and openness and people expressing themselves to the fullest. And then at a certain point, it became centralized, right? Or more and more centralized and controlled. And you got these protocols that were embedded, and things got back doors. And the whole sort of Snowden story where he sort of goes into all these issues, or WikiLeaks, right? Or the Twitter files, right? When you sort of go through all those things that have happened to the internet and to people on the internet and expressing themselves, and the involvement of these three-letter agencies on almost every level. You kind of see the same thing happening with this revolution with NFTs and Bitcoin and crypto, and for example, the involvement of BlackRock. Like, I'm not a fan of BlackRock in any way, shape, or form, and it's nice that the price goes up, but that's about the only nice thing about it.
And
Because
at what price? At what
at what
point?
price does the price goes up? Yeah. And like Johnny Law, he's a good friend of the channel, always say, it's a fight about the coins, right? It's about the coins, and they're fighting with fiat money, which is funny money, and they can let us do whatever they want with this price incentive, right? By controlling the prices, by controlling the economy. It's like the air that we breathe, or the water that the fish swims in. They can steer us in any way they want. So basically you have to keep your eyes on the ball, which is the coins, right? Because at some point this whole thing will fall apart, and the people with the most coins win to a certain extent, right?
Plus, but isn't it? I think a friend of mine was saying a bit of a theory on how you could actually get enough of power on the chain to kind of fork it, that there might be a sort of BlackRock fork of Bitcoin or something like that. And ultimately, if they got enough power, that would be the play, because I don't think, as an investment mechanism and all these kinds of things, certainly it's interesting and they want to have a good stake in it. But I would think on that level that they play, that it's much more about power than it is about benefits.
But we're going a little bit away from the art. But my personal view is that whoever created Bitcoin, and I think it doesn't really matter who it was. I mean, or the intentions behind it also don't matter anymore, because that group has no control over it. But I think the whole point behind the original idea of Bitcoin was that nobody would have control over it. So I think even if it was created by the NSA or the CIA or whatever group with bad intentions, I think the bad intentions were actually to create something that they didn't have control over, because we're heading into this crisis where all trust will be lost in every level of society. And then you have to rebuild that trust. And the only way to rebuild it is by having a foundation, a trustless foundation on which to restore trust, which is kind of ironic, right? That you need to have something outside of your control in order to restore the trust in the system. But what they do want to control is us, right? Because they can't control Bitcoin, but they certainly can control us. So, and I think that's sort of the time bomb that's ticking, right? Bitcoin is the time bomb, and they can sort of delay the ticking time bomb by controlling it with fiat, by slowing it down or speeding it up. But eventually the bomb will explode. And then by that time, they need to control us or reduce us in some way. And I think that
sorry, please say.
That's basically my view of it. So and I think another reason that they also want a trustless bedrock like Bitcoin is because clearly, obviously, we're going into space, right? I mean, you have to be completely blind not to see the developments in space, like the space casinos, space hotels, moon bases, trains on the moon, right? Elon Musk built, going to Mars. These kind of things, the WEF is also openly talking about this kind of stuff. And if that's the case, it will be like a revisit to the colonization of the new world, right? You will start colonies that will have to trust the home world, that they won't screw around with the base layer, right? So that there needs to be something that everybody can trust in order to sort of create that vision. And then it also helps if you can control the whole world, the home world, one government, one system, makes a lot of sense if you want to create such an enterprise. But this is like
But I'll tell you one thing. It's a slightly different perspective, because technology and creating trust with technology is one thing, and then there's the very human way of doing it. And one fascinating example that I've kind of dealt with is that because my wife is Hare Krishna, right? So when we came back to Helsinki from underneath COVID. She started going to the temple, and I first started going there because I wanted to check that there was no cultish something sex cult being kind of operated underneath it all, or whatever. And I went there and I started hanging out with the monks and seeing what was happening and everything. And I fell in love with the people, and I don't always agree with everything that is kind of being presented, or it doesn't even feel like mine. But what I foundationally started feeling about the whole place is that these people are exactly like who they say they are. There was no like underneath something like David Lynchian suburb, something underneath lurks or whatever. No, I felt like, no, this is an actually wholesome community with these people like doing their thing, and they have their
it's a community.
Yep, right. But if you look at the Krishna movement as a wider whole, well, I just learned through this guy from Joe Rogan, who's made a documentary about it, is that one of the disciples of Prabhupada, who was the main guy who brought it to the West, went off the rails, and he started his own cult, essentially, under the Hare Krishna premise, and started raping kids and doing all kinds of murders and whatever. So went completely off the rails from it. But the Krishna movement, they confronted it and they cleaned it out, and then they kind of like ostracized the whole thing and made sure that thing was dealt with. And they don't really get enough credit. Some people know that something went off somewhere at some point, but they don't know that it was actually confronted and ousted and cleaned, unlike the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
So a massive organization that has been running for the longest of times, that is not considered, in this, and anyone who knows anything about the Krishna movement knows that is not a cult. It has its, in the perspective that people understand it, because it runs for thousands of years going back to India. So it's not a new thing. It's like as old as the religions of many of them. But in this form that it is now, they actually confronted it. They confronted what the rot was, and then they brought it to the surface and ousted it. Unlike what the Catholic Church did, and they still allow that thing to rot underneath, so that we have lost the trust in that institution for the most part, because it's even a budding joke that like little kids like the Catholic priests do, and then that's a thing that they could have just confronted with human courage. Yeah. You wouldn't have needed a technology layer or anything like that. You just did the right thing. And in the general picture of things, as much as I agree with you on Bitcoin and the trustless layers and technology and what it can do to us, I still think one of the most foundational things that we can do that are easily accessible, not easily accessible to everyone, because it's the scariest thing, is to do the thing that that requires bravery. But that's still being brave is probably the best technology that we have in order to confront whatever issue it is that we have in our society. And I suppose that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm shit scared to say that, oh, by the way, our art world has been run by the feminist perspective and gay perspective for decades. I know what I'm saying. I'm not a dummy. I know that if that is being heard anywhere, that's going to even make my case worse, probably. But I came to Web3 for this freedom. I came here to freedom of expression, and I know it's the right thing. And I was saying that thing about the Medici family because I was hoping to find that kind of a mess in it for myself.
Yeah, but what I totally agree with what you're saying, of course, right? Bitcoin won't save us; we have to save ourselves, right? But Bitcoin is a powerful tool in order to save us. And what Jeff Booth always says is like, all technology centralizes, and there's some extremely interesting videos, presentations on it from Santa Fe Institute, where they sort of explain how technology centralizes. But Bitcoin is like a technology that decentralizes. Like that's the only thing that it does. It's like it's optimizing for inefficiency, right? That's kind of what Lowry was talking about. And when you sort of think about it, it's like in a world that is drenched, soaked, inundated with technology, right? And it's only becoming more and more technological. We need some technology that sort of safeguards against that centralization by sort of reversing it. And Bitcoin is like the only thing that could sort of fulfill that function. And I think that's why Larry Fink of BlackRock is in it, right? Otherwise he wouldn't, touch it with a 10-foot pole. He knows that it's the future and that, that we need it. That's why they want to control it as best as they can. like they in a sense, you can also not control gold or silver, right? It's just there. It's a rock. You cannot control a rock, but you can control it through ETFs, right? So and the same thing with Bitcoin. Like you cannot control Bitcoin, but you can control all the on and off ramps, and you can certainly also control people. And the fewer people there are, and the more automatization there is, the easier that becomes. And I think that is sort of what's happening here. And then they, personally, I think because of this whole thing that is happening, and I think it also has to do with the singularity, which might already have happened. Who knows, right? But let's say we are very close to it, and the people at the top know we're very close to it. And basically, when you sort of reach the singularity, that changes human history. Like it turns human history on its head. And then that means that there's a big prize there to be had, right? And the people who get their hands on the prize, in their view or in their mindset, they might think that they no longer need other people, or that other people turn into a liability instead of an asset, right? Because Western civilization was from the 16th century.
Useless breathers.
Yeah, like useless,
lovely term.
Useless breeders, right? Will fill in, or the what did Hillary Clinton say? The detestables or the deplorables. That was the deplorables. Fly over America, or fill in blank, right? Or what Harari says, give them games and drugs and till they're gone. That's sort of the mindset of the World Economic Forum, like that there's too many people, and many people have absorbed that view, right? If you ask people in general, like, are there too many people? 9 out of 10 people say yes. It would be nice if a lot of them would die. Right, it would be good for the would be good for the planet, right? And I think, like,
it's actually all the people would fit into the state of New York, or is it even just the island of Manhattan?
Yeah, and we used to think that people are assets, right? People can be assets, right? We need like a sort of natural law ID, or like a negative freedom instead of positive freedom. Where people sort of learn how to control themselves, and by controlling themselves, there's room for everybody, right? So that is sort of the idea that John Stuart Mills had, like, by giving people the room to express themselves, but by not treading on the same rights that the other person has, you create inclusivity naturally, and you create strong individuals. And that's basically the same ethos that Bitcoin is spreading by being Bitcoin, and giving people a sort of foothold on self-sovereignty. So, and that's why it's such a ticking time bomb for the current system, because it sort of creates real individuals that dare to speak out against power, because they have like a foothold in freedom, right? They become free people again, which that cannot be controlled, or that are not dependent on the current condition, and they are open to exploring new conditions that are better for people, and that are more community focused. And
what? Can I just say this, because it reflects to that quite a bit. Is like one of the first things that I felt like pulled me out of the matrix, and this is around 2006 or something like that. I saw this documentary called The Corporation. Have you seen it?
No.
It's basically these giant corporations, from all these big pharmaceutical companies to whatever, and the basic premise of the documentary is that if the corporation is a human person, like they have in their rights now in many different ways, what kind of a person is it? Yeah. So it basically had all the tick a box if you're a psychopath, and then kind of explored how the corporations are functioning. And at that time, we still lived in a world where the right wing was more pro-corporation and left was anti-corporation, and they knew all the kinds of different things, from pollution to whatever that the corporations had done, or Nestle killing 10,000 babies with their baby formula type situations, and was it Bear? They had this example of that there was a hemophiliac medication that was tainted with the HI virus, and at that point it was really a death sentence if you got it, and they got it it was pulled in America because they found the virus in it. But then, with the approval somehow of FDA, they managed to ship the medication, I think, to different parts of Europe as well as Asia, and again giving like young kids and whatever the HIV. So that's that kind of like, and they fully knowingly did this.
Yeah.
And it's those kinds of things that the whole documentary is full of, and all these kinds of things. And I was like, okay, so this is interesting that all of a sudden now we live in a situation where the left is very pro-corporation, because the corporations now all of a sudden have these DEI movements and whatever. So now the corporation is good; it's not doing anything bad, and
Yeah, good in name.
they no longer lie to us at all, or whatever it is. But then all of a sudden, the absolute naivety, what I think the modern left has, is that if you really think of what the government is, that it's the ultimate corporation.
Yep.
Because it's the one that has the, you know, it can tax you, it has the monopoly on violence or whatever, and it has the same kind of structure almost that a corporation does to a certain kind of degree, that you kind of think that our democracy is still functioning. But it's an organization, and if it has all of those monopolies, to think that it doesn't have any incentive to lie or deceit or to do the different kinds of things in order to maintain or grow its own power or do these kinds of things is the biggest paradox, I would say, of our time, is how those people who just a while ago still knew as leftists that, you know, corporations do pretty interesting things, now absolutely fully trust corporations and don't have any critique towards them whatsoever. And that's what I'm saying, is that like the Church of Progress, as in, can you imagine if our recent history that we've seen this happen like as a full loop like this to become something so different? What is it when you go back 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years of what we know of our history, and up until now coming to this point? We can just only imagine what kind of regeneration has happened, but mostly degeneration, you know? So and that's also, I suppose, that was a little bit of a pet peeve of mine in the crypto community also, because people are called degens.
Yeah.
And I was like, this was meant to be the most generative movement of our time, to kind of, because everything else has been degenerative for such a long time. We don't need to be that, guys. We could be the generators. But I think in some sense, even if that's a silly analogy of sorts, it's kind of reflective of what our space has become. It's also like, just now it's meme coins and garbage and something, and I don't see many people anymore talking about what the actual thing was about anymore, to the point of where I'm kind of embarrassed to say that I'm doing NFTs or something like that, because it's such a small minority who are doing it. What the actual point of it was, that it's so minuscule that I think I'm starting to be better off just calling myself an artist and changing my website back to something different, and kind of like, yeah, it's the NFTs are a part of it or whatever. But this website that I've had, artforcrypto.com, I think I'm going to start to take it down and just become Vesa something and the website, and it'll be a part of the history and the whole thing. And still, in philosophy and my friends in the community, whatever it is that I have, I'm for the real Web3 thing. But much like everything else now, Web3 doesn't stand for Web3.
I understand what you mean. Even though I do think, even if you exit, for example, you will still run in the same issues, right? So
yeah. And I'm not saying, oh, I'm leaving, you know, this kind of thing.
No, I
It's
understand.
like I have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
I was waiting for this fucking thing to happen for 15 years before it happened, and when it's happened, I don't have an exit, so I'm not gonna like all drama out of it. That's not the point. But in representation, it's no longer very beneficial, because even those who are on the inside of our world are not doing what it was meant to do for the most part.
No, I agree with what you say, and it's very sad to see it degenerate. I mean, even though I do like the term degen, right? It gives us sort of a Ronin kind of vibe.
Yeah, I get it. Fucking generative. It's square, fine, but still, like in terms of that words have meaning, and
Yeah.
sometimes when you put something into motion and you speak it into reality, that's what
Yeah.
it becomes. And I think to some degree the whole degen thing is that we saw art degenerate into to pixels and whatever, and we saw the sound money concept to be printed into meme coins, and we saw there has been a huge theme of degeneration in this space.
Yeah, but that's sort of so I love what you do, and I think, you know, one of the reasons why you're sort of so aware of all of this is because you're basically aiming for the ideals, right? So you're sort of like a classic, in that sense, a sort of classic artist that is still trying to reach for the highest expression that art is able to achieve. And like you said at the beginning of this conversation, that sort of whole idea, or that whole ideal, sort of also that Hegel speaks about, is, you know, that has been let go, right? And it has been sort of antithetical to postmodernism and post-structuralism and all the other isms that have come afterwards. That idea, but I do think that it is powerful. That it's powerful to tap into sort of the day-to-day life of into day-to-day lives, and I think that's sort of the degen movement is it sort of takes its essence or its power from all these individuals that are, you know, just doing their thing regardless of what other people think of them or want them to do. And that's sort of Ronin kind of characteristic of it. And I think what a true artist then could do is transmute this degen culture into a higher form of art, right? So I think the sort of degen movement is pretty powerful and organic and real, and it stands for freedom. And people just use whatever they can to express themselves, and often in sort of as an antithetical to the society that they detest, right? So a lot of
No, I get it. I totally get it. It's
but
like
they're sort
the
of
concept of rebellion is not lost on me, my friend. That's
no,
I was kind of embedded with that ever since I was.
But like I agree, it gets stuck there, right? So and then it doesn't elevate, and that's that's the thing that's shameful, and or at least where I agree with you, that it then should be transmuted into something higher, right? Then they should pick their champions, and that's where the medici should come from, right? These degens amassed a lot of wealth, some of them. Not all of them, of course, but a lot of them have amassed a lot of wealth, and then they can pick their champions and you know, try to elevate this to a higher level, higher aesthetics. That would be also antithetical to the current society, right? Because they can't handle ideals, right? Because ideals make people aspire to them. And that's the last thing that our society wants. You know, people aspiring to something higher. That becomes very dangerous.
I think this is what I'm doing here, is that to a relative degree is like, for example, when I work with these models, of course, the first criticism is that do they have to be nude on top of all the other things? And basically what happens is that, and what these model interviews will kind of, as I now started to publish them, they agree themselves, is that once your back is up against the wall to the degree that there is nothing on you as you're kind of confronting your own psychology and your own self. And the movie Solaris, the Tarkovsky one, was really about going to another planet to basically find yourself and your childhood, kind of as an exploration. Is that once your back is up against the wall, that you have no more masks to hide under, and you kind of are allowed to explore these NLP techniques of going on a timeline to your earliest childhood memory of feeling like when you were disempowered, your family was kind of disrupted and fought or something like that, to all the way imagining yourself to be an old woman at the end of your life and things have gone well, and you get to, in your mind, go ask for advice from yourself of how you should kind of orient yourself when you're going towards the future of where you're going to be going. And because it's your own brain that is doing all of this work, you're able to sort of trust it in a way. So now that these models themselves kind of say, yeah, I get it now. I get, because my back was up. There's nothing to hide under. So therefore, this kind of attitude of fuck it, let's just go and explore this then of what it is that I can be and how high can I aspire to go, as opposed to, like you were saying, oh, are you leaving this space, so to speak? No, it's not that. I'm speaking this because I'm fighting for this.
Yeah.
My back is up against the wall. There's nowhere where I can go. That I don't want to run and hide and go like, oh, maybe I'll try something else or whatever it is. There's nothing like that. No, for me, this is a similar kind of situation. It's like, no, this is it. This is what I was waiting for. This is what I fought for. And this is what I'll still continue to fight for. And I think somewhere there's going to be people who will hear this and resonate and go, oh, I'm also a body and I can do something about this. Because that's how I kind of got awoken to this whole movement and ideas. And it started from documentaries like The Corporation or Zeitgeist or whatever that taught me how the monetary system works or whatever it is. And then you can either, if you get that spark, you can either cower in front of it and go into hiding mode and pretend like the genie didn't come out of the bottle, or then once you're confronted with this thing, then you know, I think life is going to be a fight always.
Yeah,
you know?
there will definitely be a fight, and I agree, right? I think bravery or courage is a virtue that's not very often spoken about. I do see people talk about it in crypto, or at least in certain facets or certain groups of communities of in the crypto sphere. But there will be a fight, right? If we want it or not, because society is sort of breaking apart. We can feel it, we can see it, and one of the things that I often, have trouble with maxis is that they sort of kind of think that Bitcoin will solve this for them, or that they can retreat into their citadel and then come out after. Or it's sort of like a bunker mentality, like I got a big bunker, and after sort of the nuclear fallout, I'll come out of my citadel, and then the world will be amazing. Right? I think that it doesn't work like that, right? We really have to fight for society and to turn it around, and that's also why I love individuals like yourself, but also many other people that we've interviewed. Is and even if you don't all agree with each other or with me, right? That doesn't really matter, because you sort of respect each other's views. And you respect each other as individuals, but you also respect each other, that you kind of know that you have to make a stand, and that you have to stand for something, even though it's scary, and even though you have much to lose, or even if you have nothing to lose, right? It can still be scary, and the more people like that emerge and fighting for a better future, right? You probably don't have to have too many of them. In the past, you only needed like 3 to 5% of the population that sort of wakes up, and you can turn it around. I think that percentage is probably higher now in order to turn it around, because of the control systems that have been rolled out. But it can still be done, right? And I think that's what I love about you and your art, and these kind of interviews that we do, is that we, even if it's just a few people that we reach, and or give tools or ideas or handles on the situation, and that they can share with their family or friends, and that's also why I do what I do. And in my personal opinion, I think Bitcoin is a powerful tool in that set of tools. And I think also NFTs, like the original idea behind NFTs and even crypto, can work, and I think they will work, right? Because once things actually break down, then people will start looking at Bitcoin and crypto and NFTs in exactly the way that we are talking about them, because then they become what they were originally intended, like ways to circumvent control. And basically to reassert control on an individual level, right? So So I think it will happen, but people in the West, they have trouble, like you said, they have trouble imagining a government going rogue. Like people all over the world, they have no trouble imagining that because they're living it on a day-to-day basis. But
Because it's no longer not so much about the government. It's the whatever the global movement has become,
yeah,
that giant corporations have more power than many governments, and then those governments all of a sudden have these interest groups and World Economic Forum and other things that kind of guide them, and there's this
yeah,
different circle that has no longer to do with what we perceived to be government just a while ago.
no, but
So
I think, basically it's the classic definition of fascism, right? Where government and big business merge into one thing, where they bundle together. That's what we have right now, and I think like Jeff Booth and others have made the point brilliantly. It's because the money is broken. That's why it happened in the first place. And it's probably started with the best intentions, to give the economy a boost. But on this scale that we have reached right now, it has become like cocaine addicts, and the only thing that they can do is boost their own pockets, right? And that's why these companies have grown as big as they got, because they figured out that the only customer they had was the government, and the government kind of recognized, oh, if I do a one with this kind of company, right? If I keep saving them, they can keep giving me stuff, and that's sort of how the corruption gets into the system, and government and big business become one and the same thing. And then they just blame capitalism, because capitalism is a word, it cannot say anything. And then they say, oh yeah, it's capitalism. So what do we need? More government, right? So it's like a negative feedback circle that it's not going to stop unless people wake up and become aware that the government is not here. Big business grows bigger, and the government becomes more unresponsive.
well, because there's when it comes to, because I suppose this is the whole thing, is like I'm trying to be as holistic of a thinker as I possibly can, because what I perceive to be real inclusion is, even if I don't agree with someone, that I've understood their point of view. And one of the things that happened to me politically after I got quite indoctrinated in film school, and then by some documentaries and a certain kind of point of view that was taking me very, very much into the left, at some point, is that when I heard the counter arguments that this is the real conservative point of view, even though that's not my tendency, but at least all of a sudden I understood a different point of view that brought me to balance on this whole thing. And what was so annoying about the first sort of years of life and being young and going leftist passionately or something like that, is when you realize that you've been lied to. Like, for example, the whole thing, my mom was saying that whole 70 cents to the dollar ever since I was a kid, but no one told me that, it actually comes about in a way that is choice, not forced. So when I started learning all of these different kinds of things, where the thing that gave me the fervor or the righteous indignation that I had when I was younger in this kind of way wasn't coming from truthful things. And then I started looking at different things very differently. And then simultaneously, I know that a lot of the, let's say, our mentality people in our space are libertarians, and the kind of extreme individualism and this kind of like, I'm just doing my thing, you do your thing and whatever. I resonate with it, with a, let's say, on a societal and material point of view, but on a spiritual point of view, I know it's a lie. Because we, like, our bodies are microbiome and all different kinds of things and viruses and whatever, and somehow it's held together even though it's molecules and mostly empty space. There's some laws that govern for my body to function that I have no knowledge of being. So I'm an ecosystem just as an individual already, and then we have these ideas and groups, and we band together and we do this and we become movements and all of these kinds of things. And we're kind of like in psychedelic trips when I've done, you kind of, at best, sometimes you kind of get dissolved into the energy grid highway that is the whole of the cosmos. And then you realize that your everything is fluid and kind of structural at the same time, and they sort of live like this. And it's not true that you can be an individual, that you can be separate from your society or from your family or these kinds of things. Even if you don't have a family, like let's say you were an orphan and you made your way and you were totally alone and whatever, still you were part of a fabric that was around you somehow, that made it possible for you to pull through on that kind of a level. So it's like, it's not good to look at anything from a super insular or one-sided view or get too passionate. And I certainly have that tendency, as probably our talks and everything. And by the way, I love these chats just as much. I appreciate these moments very much, because we are so resonant. And I very much agree with that as well, is that every time I disagree or I add something or whatever, it just comes from the point of view of primarily first respect, but also in the spirit of the conversation. I can have an actual conversation with you about things, and I learn from you each time we talk, and hopefully the other way around. And that's kind of the point. We're not a like single hive mind, and that's a part of the fun of this whole. But I probably don't do myself, because the intent is to be actually inclusive in my point of view, and take all of these things into consideration. If I'm then in an art space, I will have the tendency and the urge to say, oh, this is actually kind of fucked up about this. And it won't come from the place of, oh, I hate the art world. It comes from, we can do this better. And it should be better, if it's gone off the rails a little bit. And simultaneously, like if it's an extremely individual space or something like that, I'm just on my own, each man for themselves, and I do just whatever I want, whenever I want. That's also an ideology of a toddler, It's like we're embedded into this fabric of life, and we have to get along with one another to some degree. And it's getting increasingly heated to try and do that,
Yeah. No, I think you shared this cartoon, and I think it's brilliant, because I actually use the same logic, but I never made a cartoon of it. But this one, this is an inclusive society, and if you feel you are talking, thinking, or behaving in a non-inclusive way, you will be excluded, right? So that is sort of the incoherence or the contradiction inherent by enforcing it, right? So inclusion can only come by letting it grow organically, and and the way that you can let it grow organically is by focusing on the individual as sort of a touchstone of a society. And of course, like what you said, I totally agree. But with sort of personal growth, it usually happens like you start off as a kid, and then you're part of a family unit. And then you grow, so you cut loose from that unit and you become an individual. And then if you successfully become that individual, then you re-plug in as an individual into a group, which then consists of real individuals, right? But the danger that we have right now is that we don't have a group of individuals that are a community, but that we have non-individuals that are a collective hive mind. Right, so it's not a community; it's a collective,
and not necessarily controlled or guided towards the best intentions of the majority of the group.
Yeah, and then I think collective could probably never ever achieve that anyway, right? Because the collective will always sacrifice the individual for the group, because the group supersedes the individual on every level. But it should be the other way around, right? We build this system, this government, to serve us, right? That is why we thought like it was a good idea in the first place. But right now we are here to serve the system, and that's sort of when you're beyond the tipping point, like when they're saying like, okay, we can sacrifice that group over there. And that's also when the Roman Empire or the Harappan Empire or the Mesoamerican empires, when all these empires fall apart, is they start sacrificing parts of the body politic that they no longer need in order to save the heart of the system, until the heart of the system goes last. But you see the sort of the fraying on the fringes of of these empires. They first they chop off the toes and the feet and the hands, until they come at those critical organs that they cannot miss for the society to work. And because the whole world is now one system, right? That's because of globalism. It has been, over time it became one giant organic thing by outsourcing everything. Now, basically, what we've been seeing these past 20, 30, or 50 years is that not 50, let's say last 20 years, that they're fraying on the edges, and that they're sacrificing more and more of the outer regions, and you see it creeping inside. It's getting closer and closer, and that's also why the polarization is acting up. And yeah, I think these are all symptoms of one and the same thing. But it's very difficult to see, right? For the people who are still inside it, it kind of seems like a myriad of things, like 10,000.
People are just hoping if they make themselves small enough and silent,
it will go away,
and whatever, it'll go away. And it's like it's not. It's not. It's gonna get a lot worse from here, even if we keep being like that. And
and I think that's also, just to tie it up, because I also have to round it up. But I think that's where art can play a very important role, right? Like the jester that you said at the court. The court is doomed when the jester dies and there's nobody because then everybody says yes to the king, and then the king has no idea of whatever happens outside of the fortress, because everybody's just telling him what he wants to hear, and he cannot trust anybody anymore, because at the first sign of weakness they will kill him. So he becomes a prisoner of his own kingdom, and so so when the jester dies, or when artists can no longer express themselves fully, that is sort of like the canary in the coal mine. That's like the first sign of a decaying empire, and that that things are getting serious, and that you should stand up and speak out for artists to express themselves fully, even if you don't agree with them, or with jesters to make jokes even if you find them detestable, stuff that we took for granted for
long time
since I grown up, right? I always knew, like, even if I don't agree with you, I'll defend to the death your right to say it. That was like Voltaire's, I'm paraphrasing it a little bit, but that sort of mindset was common in the Western world, and we completely lost it.
Well, it's a powerful thing, to speak at least what you think is right, and with courage, and hopefully with a little pre-thought on what you're going to say. I think in both of our cases we've done that. So if people have hung with us up until now and kind of listened to this, I hope they feel like they got their money's worth. And the kind of struggle uphill continues on this. But I really do also find it, now that I'm of a certain age, and I feel that some things like of this they don't need to be this hard, also. And we have enough network, we have enough people who are resonant, and those who are doing significant contributions can get contributions and support into what they're doing, because it's in all of our benefit. So it's kind of a non-brainer, and I'm very grateful for these sessions. I mean, I hope I didn't turn this into too much of a personal Vesa therapy session.
No, that's always fun to explore all these avenues, and I like I said, I think your art is incredible, and I think the census that you're doing with these women and the interviews behind them. For people who don't know, check them out. Follow Vesa. And but I think they speak to all the stuff that we spoke about, and I think there's many other artists like you who are also trying to fight this fight and expressing themselves fully, and not putting water by the wine, if that's an English expression. It's a Dutch expression, I think, but not diluting their art to get views or whatever. I think we will get there. Yeah.
Much love, brother. Thank you.
Yeah, let's
time and chat. Always appreciated.
Same here. I gotta go, and but I really enjoyed it, and and like you, I hope people had, yeah, it was useful to the people who were watching. Thank you for watching, by the way.
Yeah, same. All right. Have a great evening. I'll see you soon.
Take care.
All right. Bye.